Ever since I was a kid, I dreamed of owning a lake house. Not some fancy place for parties or fishing weekends, but a real home, quiet, peaceful, and surrounded by trees where the wind hummed against the windows at night. I remember sitting on my grandfather's dock at Lake Winnipesaukee when I was maybe 10, dangling my feet in the cool water, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and purple. One day, I'd told him, I'm going to have my own place right on the water. He'd ruffled my hair and said, "You work hard enough, Tommy, and you'll get there." And work I did. After college, while friends were taking gap years to backpack through Europe or working just enough to afford weekend bar tabs, I put in 60-hour weeks at Richardson and Associates. My tiny apartment in Somerville had a leaky faucet and radiators that clanked through winter nights, but I barely noticed. Every month, I'd transfer a chunk of my paycheck into a separate account labeled Lake Fund and watch the numbers climb. My weekends weren't spent at Boston clubs, but driving through New Hampshire and Vermont, touring properties I couldn't yet afford, taking mental notes about lakefront angles and tree coverage. Real estate agents would smile politely when I showed up in my 10-year-old Honda, knowing I wasn't buying anything that day. Just research, I'd explain, and they'd nod with that particular blend of patience and dismissal. After 7 years, I had enough for a down payment. Not for anything fancy, mind you, but enough for a modest cabin on the less fashionable side of Silver Lake. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with pine cabinets that had seen better days, and windows that needed new seals. But it also had a small dock, tall pines that whispered in the breeze, and the sound of loons echoing across the water at dusk. When I turned the key for the first time, I stood in the empty living room and just breathed. The first piece of furniture I bought wasn't a bed or a couch, but an old Adirondack chair that I placed at the edge of the water. I spent that entire first weekend just sitting, watching ripples spread across the lake, feeling the achievement sink in. All those missed vacations, those passed-up happy hours, those extra projects I'd volunteered for, they had materialized into this moment. When I finally told my family, I expected a round of congratulations, maybe some gentle ribbing about becoming a hermit. My sister Jen was genuinely excited, immediately planning a girls' weekend with her college friends. Mom worried about me being so far from the city. What if you slip and fall out there all alone? But she was proud, I could tell. Dad's reaction was different. More intense somehow. He and Mom had divorced 5 years earlier, and he'd remarried a woman named Sharon who worked at his insurance office. Dad had always been financially comfortable but cautious. He'd preached saving and careful spending, even as he splurged on golf club memberships and weekend trips to Atlantic City with Sharon. A lake house, he boomed over the phone. Now that's something. Tell me everything. How many square feet? Waterfront footage? Who holds the title? His questions came rapid fire, with a kind of intensity that felt oddly proprietary. It's just under 1,500 square feet, I answered. About 70 feet of shoreline. And it's in my name, Dad. I bought it myself. Well, sure, he said quickly. But family's family, right? This is big, something we can all enjoy. I laughed it off. Of course you can visit anytime, I said, missing the way he emphasized we and all in his response. When I invited everyone up for the 4th of July weekend, Dad and Sharon arrived first, a full day before the time I'd suggested. I was still hanging curtains when their BMW pulled into the gravel driveway. Thought we'd come help you set up, Dad called, emerging with an expensive-looking cooler and a case of craft beer. Sharon stepped out wearing white pants and strappy sandals that seemed impractical for a cabin weekend. She smiled, but her eyes were already cataloging the property, sweeping from the dock to the newly stained deck to the pine trees that provided privacy from neighbors. It's charming, she said, in a tone that made it clear she meant small. Just perfect for weekend getaways. Dad was already walking the perimeter, peering at the foundation and checking the weatherproofing around windows. Good bones, he declared. Little TLC, and this place could really be something. We could add a sunroom right there. He pointed to the east side of the house, where you'd get the morning light. The use of "we" didn't register as odd then. I was just happy to have my achievement acknowledged, to see my family enjoying the space I'd created. That weekend was mostly perfect, grilling fresh trout I'd caught that morning, playing cards late into the night with the screen door open to catch the breeze, taking the second-hand kayaks out at dawn when the lake was still as glass. Only later would I remember the moments that should have worried me. Dad measuring the living room while muttering about sectional dimensions, Sharon asking which bedroom was theirs rather than where they'd sleep that weekend. The way they lingered after everyone else had left, Dad talking about bringing some of his power tools up to keep here permanently. I found a small notebook in the kitchen drawer after they'd gone. Inside, Sharon's neat handwriting listed renovations with estimated costs. Replace countertops, $3, $200, master bath expansion, $8, $500, and most tellingly, deck extension, spring project, $5,000. Spring project. As if they were already planning seasons ahead in my home. I called Dad that evening. "Hey, Sharon left her notebook here," I said casually. "Looks like she's got big plans for renovations." He laughed, a bit too quickly. "Oh, you know Sharon, always planning that one." Just thinking out loud. "It's your place, of course." "Of course," I echoed, feeling a strange uneasiness settle in my stomach. Though, he added, his voice taking on that familiar persuasive tone he used when selling insurance policies. "In this economy, real estate's the only safe investment. And family properties, well, they're something special. Your grandkids could be swimming off that dock someday." I mumbled agreement and changed the subject, but as I hung up, I wondered why the thought of family legacy suddenly felt more like a threat than a comfort. That night, I sat in my Adirondack chair watching moonlight spill across the water. The dream that had sustained me through years of sacrifice still felt right, still felt mine. But for the first time, I sensed that I might need to protect it, not just from storms or winter damage, but from the people I'd assumed would simply be happy for me. The changes were so gradual that for weeks I didn't fully register what was happening. It started with small things, a forgotten jacket, a pair of Sharon's reading glasses on the coffee table. Dad would call midweek and say, "We're thinking of driving up to check on the place tomorrow. That okay with you?" The first time, I drove up from Boston to meet them, expecting a quick visit. Instead, they'd arrived with a car full of supplies, new curtains for the guest room, kitchen gadgets I'd never use, a set of expensive outdoor furniture that replaced my garage sale finds. "You didn't need to do all this," I said, watching Sharon arrange coordinating throw pillows on my couch. "Don't be silly," she replied without looking up. "This place needed a woman's touch." Dad clapped me on the shoulder. "Wait till you see what else we brought. New fishing gear in the shed, and I've got a guy coming next week to look at expanding the dock." I froze. "You scheduled work without asking me?" "Just a consultation," he backpedaled. "Besides, I was thinking we could split the cost. Make it a proper family dock." There it was again, that word. Family. As if the house existed in some communal ownership already. "Dad, I appreciate the thought, but I need to be involved in decisions about the property." "It's of course," he interrupted, already moving on. "Hey, did you see the new grill cover Sharon picked up? Weather resistant." The old one wouldn't have lasted another season. I hadn't bought a grill cover, which meant they'd noticed something around the house and independently decided to replace it. How often were they coming up here without me? I checked my calendar. It had been just over 2 months since the 4th of July weekend. Since then, I'd managed to come up 5 times, not as often as I'd like, but I was still juggling my full-time job in the city. Yet somehow, everything felt different. My coffee mugs had been rearranged. The bookshelf had new titles I hadn't purchased. The shed was reorganized with labeled bins and hooks. Most disturbingly, the second bedroom now had a dresser I didn't recognize, filled with Dad's t-shirts and Sharon's sweaters. One Friday in late September, I drove up after work without calling ahead. The leaves were just beginning to turn, splashes of crimson and gold among the green, and the lake reflected the sunset in rippling orange ribbons. I'd been looking forward to this moment all week, the quiet arrival, the sacred first breath of lake air that always felt like coming home. But when I pulled into the driveway, Dad's BMW was already there. Through the window, I could see the blue glow of the television, and smoke rose from the chimney. I sat in my car for a long moment, trying to understand why I felt like I was intruding. I entered using my key, calling out, "Hello," as if I were a visitor rather than the owner. Sharon looked up from the couch, surprise quickly replaced by a tight smile. "Tommy, we weren't expecting you." My dad emerged from the kitchen with a wooden spoon in hand. "Hey, kiddo. What a nice surprise. We're just making that mushroom pasta you liked last time." I stood in the entryway, taking in the scene. The living room had been rearranged, my reading chair now positioned differently, new lamps on side tables I didn't recognize. A framed photo of Dad and Sharon from their wedding had appeared on the mantel, alongside a picture of Dad's parents that used to be in his office. "I didn't know you guys were coming up this weekend," I said carefully, setting down my overnight bag. "We've been up since Wednesday," Dad said cheerfully. "Sharon had some vacation days to use, and it's so peaceful here for work. I've been handling claims remotely. The internet's patchy, though. We should look into upgrading the service." Wednesday. They'd been living in my house for 3 days without asking or even mentioning it. "How often do you come up here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. They exchanged a quick glance. "Oh, you know." Dad waved the spoon dismissively. "Whenever we can get away. Place shouldn't sit empty too much. Not good for it." I walked to the refrigerator, opened it, and found it fully stocked. Not with weekend provisions, but with a full grocery shop, condiments, vegetables, meal prep containers. The freezer had labeled portions of soups and casseroles. "Are those Mom's old Tupperware containers?" I asked, recognizing the faded blue lids from my childhood kitchen. Sharon answered while Dad suddenly became very interested in his pasta sauce. "Alan thought they weren't being used at his old house, so we brought them up. They're perfect for freezing leftovers." Alan. She called my father by his first name, which always created an odd distance, as if we were talking about a mutual acquaintance rather than my dad. That night, they insisted I take my room, the master bedroom, while they used the guest room. Except when I went to put my things away, I found the master closet contained several of Dad's flannel shirts and a row of Sharon's blouses. The bedside table had her night cream and his reading glasses. The only reason the bed was free was because they hadn't expected me. I retreated to the porch with a whiskey, trying to sort through my feelings. The temperature had dropped, and the lake was a black mirror reflecting pinpricks of stars. This view, this peace, was exactly what I'd worked for. But now it felt compromised. Dad joined me after dinner cleanup, carrying his own glass. "Beautiful night," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Sharon and I were thinking about putting in a hot tub over there." He pointed to the corner of the deck. "Perfect spot for stargazing in winter." "Dad," I said carefully, "we need to talk about some boundaries here." "Boundaries?" His voice took on that wounded tone I remembered from childhood, when he'd been caught breaking a promise, but wanted to make me feel bad for pointing it out. "Yeah, this is my house. I'm happy to have you visit, but you've been making a lot of changes without asking. And apparently staying here for days at a time without even telling me." He stared out at the lake for a long moment. "I didn't think you'd mind. We're family." "I know we're family. But this is still my property. I paid for it. I need to know when you're going to be here." "Paid for it with what I taught you," he said, a new edge to his voice. "All those lessons about saving, investing early. Who do you think gave you those tools?" I blinked, taken aback. "Are you saying you deserve credit for my down payment because you gave me financial advice?" "I'm saying family supports each other. Your mother and I sacrificed for years to put you through college without loans. We gave you the foundation for success." He took a sip of his whiskey. "And now you have this beautiful place, and we're just trying to enjoy our retirement years. Would it kill you to share a little?" The word share hung in the air between us. This wasn't about occasional visits or even regular use. This was about ownership. "I need the spare key back," I said quietly. Dad's shoulders stiffened. "You're overreacting. We've just been taking care of the place. Making improvements. Making it yours," I corrected. "Without asking." "The key, Dad." He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the deck. "Fine, if that's how you want it. We'll leave in the morning." He stormed inside, and I heard the low murmur of his voice explaining to Sharon, followed by her higher-pitched response. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were unified in their indignation. The next morning, they made a show of packing up, moving slowly, as if giving me time to reconsider. Sharon kept sighing loudly every time she folded something. "We'll need to come back for the rest of our things," Dad said pointedly, gesturing to the kitchen gadgets and books they'd accumulated. "Just let me know when," I replied, holding out my hand for the key. Dad dropped it into my palm without meeting my eyes. "You know, Tommy, you've changed. Success has made you selfish." They drove away with a spray of gravel, leaving me standing on the porch of my own home, feeling somehow like the villain. I spent the rest of that weekend reclaiming my space, moving furniture back, taking down their photos, reorganizing the kitchen. But the sense of invasion lingered. I kept wondering how much time they'd spent here without my knowledge, what conversations they'd had about the property, about me. Later that week, I received a terse email from Dad with a detailed list of improvements they'd made, along with costs, as if I owed them reimbursement. The total came to over $8,000. The final line read, "We expect to be compensated for these family investments in what we understood to be a shared legacy property." I deleted the email without responding. 2 weeks passed without contact. Then, while paying my property taxes online, I noticed something odd in the county records portal. There was a recent activity flag on my deed. Curious, I clicked through, expecting to find some routine administrative update. What I found instead made my blood run cold. I stared at my computer screen, the county records website glowing back at me with information that couldn't possibly be correct. There was an amendment request dated just 3 weeks earlier, a request to add Alan Whitmore and Sharon Whitmore as co-owners with right of survivorship. Right of survivorship. The legal term echoed in my head with a sinister ring. It meant that if I died, the property would automatically transfer to them, not to any future children I might have, not to my sister Jen, not to anyone else I might choose. Just them. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, some clerical error or crossed wires in the system. But the longer I looked, the more details emerged. The request included a scan of transfer paperwork with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. Except I'd never signed anything. I called the county clerk's office immediately, my voice tight with controlled panic. "I need to verify some information about a property amendment," I said when the receptionist answered. "There's been a mistake." "Property address?" she asked, keyboard clicking in the background. I gave her the lake house address and waited, drumming my fingers against my desk, ignoring the mounting emails from work. "Yes, I see it here," she finally said. Amendment request submitted on September 27th by Alan Whitmore, with consent signatures from all current deed holders. "That's the problem," I said. "I never gave consent. I never signed anything." A pause. "Sir, we have a document with your signature. It's been notarized." "It's forged," I said flatly. "I need to see this document and file a formal objection immediately." "You'll need to come to the office in person for that," she explained, her voice now more cautious. "And if you're alleging forgery, you might want to bring legal representation." I thanked her, hung up, and immediately called in sick to work. The 3-hour drive to Carroll County gave me plenty of time to cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally, a cold, focused determination. I hadn't fought for this dream only to have it stolen through paperwork fraud. The county clerk's office was housed in an old brick building in Ossipee, with worn wooden floors that creaked under my feet as I approached the records department. The woman at the counter, her nameplate read, Margaret, had the patient expression of someone who regularly dealt with confused or angry property owners. "I called earlier about a fraudulent amendment," I explained, presenting my ID. "Thomas Clark. Property on Silver Lake." Margaret nodded and pulled a file from a nearby cabinet. "We keep hard copies of recent transactions," she explained, spreading out several documents on the counter between us. "Here's the amendment request and the supporting documentation." I leaned forward to examine the papers. The request form was filled out in my father's neat handwriting, but the signature at the bottom was supposedly mine. It was close enough that someone who didn't see my signature regularly might accept it, but the loop on the T was wrong and the final K in Clark lacked my characteristic upward flick. "This isn't my signature," I said firmly. "I never authorized this change." Margaret frowned slightly. It's been notarized, she pointed out, indicating the stamp and signature in the corner. I looked closer at the notary information. Diane Felton, I read aloud. The name was vaguely familiar. She's registered in Wakefield, Margaret supplied. Does regular work for several real estate offices in the area. And then it clicked. Diane Felton, the wife of Bob Felton, who worked at my dad's insurance agency. A convenient connection. I'd like a copy of all of these documents, please, I said, keeping my voice level despite the betrayal burning in my chest. And I need to file a formal objection to this amendment. Margaret walked me through the process, which involved filling out several forms and paying a small fee. This will suspend the amendment temporarily, she explained. But if you're alleging forgery, you should really consult an attorney. Property disputes can get complicated. I already have one in mind, I assured her, thinking of Rachel Goldstein, a college friend who specialized in real estate law. We'd kept in touch over the years, meeting for occasional dinners when she was in Boston. I'd need someone I could trust completely. Armed with certified copies of everything, I drove straight from the county office to a local cafe with good Wi-Fi. I called Rachel from the parking lot. Tommy, she answered warmly. It's been ages. How's Lake life treating you? Not great, actually, I said, and proceeded to explain the situation. Her friendly tone quickly shifted to professional concern. Send me everything you have right now, she instructed. Screenshots of the county records, scans of those certified copies, and any communications you've had with your father about the property. This is serious, Tommy. What they've attempted is fraud. I spent the next hour in the cafe, scanning documents with my phone and emailing everything to Rachel. As I worked, I remembered something important that had completely slipped my mind until that moment. When I'd purchased the lake house, Rachel had reviewed the closing documents for me as a professional courtesy. She'd suggested adding a special clause to the deed, a safeguard she'd seen other sole property owners use. It stated clearly that any amendments or transfers required my notarized permission, recorded in person at the county office, and that attempts to circumvent this would constitute fraud. I hurriedly dug through the original deed documents I'd brought along. There it was, in precise legal language at the bottom of page 4, the protection I'd completely forgotten about. I immediately forwarded this to Rachel as well. This changes everything, she said when I called her back. This specific clause makes their actions not just ethically wrong, but explicitly fraudulent in a way that's spelled out in your deed. It's going to be much harder for them to claim it was just a misunderstanding. What's my next step? I asked, relief mingling with a renewed sense of betrayal. My own father had tried to trick me out of my property, and might have succeeded if not for this forgotten clause. First, we formally contest the amendment, which you've already started. Then we draft a cease and desist letter putting them on notice that you're aware of what they've done and are prepared to pursue legal action. Rachel's voice was brisk, professional. I'd also recommend changing the locks immediately if they have keys. Already planning to, I assured her. And Tommy, she added, her tone softening slightly, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Family betrayals cut deeper than any other kind. I thanked her and hung up, then sat in the cafe staring out at the gray October day. Tourists were still around despite the off-season, taking photos of the early foliage, couples walking hand in hand along the lakeside path visible from the window. Normal people. People whose parents presumably hadn't tried to steal their homes. On the drive back to the lake house, I called a local locksmith who agreed to meet me there within the hour. While waiting, I walked the property, really seeing it through new eyes, not just as my sanctuary, but as something valuable enough that my own father would risk our relationship to possess it. The lakefront sparkled in the late afternoon sun. A pair of loons called to each other across the water. The trees were a riot of autumn color, deep reds, bright oranges, burnished golds. Beautiful. Worth protecting. But worth destroying a family over? I couldn't fathom it. The locksmith, a bearded man named Mike, worked quickly, replacing all the exterior locks while making small talk about the fishing season. You'll want to rekey the shed too, he suggested. People often forget that. Good thinking, I agreed, realizing I'd nearly overlooked that potential access point. After Mike left, I methodically went through the house, looking for anything else my father and Sharon might have changed or added without my knowledge. In the office desk drawer, I found a folder labeled Silver Lake Renovations. Inside were contractor estimates for projects I'd never approved: a sunroom addition, dock expansion, kitchen remodel, all dated for the coming spring. Some had already been marked deposit paid. They'd been planning this for months, I realized. The gradual invasion, the small changes, the casual references to family property, all of it building to this attempted theft. In the master bedroom closet, behind my winter coats, I discovered a garment bag containing several of Sharon's expensive dresses, carefully hung. In the guest room, the dresser drawers still contained their clothes despite their dramatic packing up when I'd asked for the key back. They'd never intended to fully leave. Most disturbing of all, in the kitchen junk drawer, I found a real estate flyer for my condo in Boston with notes in my father's handwriting about comparable listing prices. They'd been researching how much I could get for selling my primary residence, presumably so I could move to the lake house full-time, making it easier for them to establish their presence here as well. The depth of the plotting made me feel physically ill. I sat down hard on the couch, staring at the evidence spread before me. This wasn't opportunism or misunderstanding. This was calculated. My phone rang, Rachel calling back. "I've been reviewing everything," she said without preamble. "Their attempt to transfer the property is definitely illegal based on both standard property law and your specific deed clause. The use of a fraudulent signature makes it criminal. So what do we do? Right now, we're focusing on protecting your ownership. I've drafted a letter that outlines the illegal nature of their actions and demands they cease all attempts to claim the property." She paused. "Tommy, I have to ask, do you want to pursue criminal charges? Forgery is a felony." The question hung in the air. Criminal charges against my own father. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd coached my little league team, who'd helped me move into my first apartment. "Let me think about that," I finally said. "For now, I just want to secure my property." "Understood. I'll email you the cease and desist letter tonight. Print it, sign it, and send it certified mail so we have proof they received it." I spent that night alone in the house, too wired to sleep despite my exhaustion. Every creak and settling noise made me start, half expecting to find my father at the door with some new scheme. Rain began around midnight, pattering against the roof and windows, filling the darkness with a gentle white noise that finally lulled me into an uneasy sleep. In the morning, I printed Rachel's letter, 5 pages of formal legal language that essentially said, "Back off or face serious consequences." As I signed it, I wondered if this would be the end of it. Would the threat of legal action be enough? Or would they escalate, convinced they were entitled to what I'd worked so hard to build? On my way to the post office, my phone rang. Dad's number. I let it go to voicemail, not trusting myself to speak to him calmly yet. His message was brief. "Tommy, we need to talk about the lake house. Sharon and I are coming up this weekend. We've made some decisions about the property that you need to hear." Decisions. As if they had any right to make decisions about my home. I mailed the certified letter, then called Rachel back. "They're planning to come up this weekend," I told her, saying they've made some decisions about the property. "Do not engage with them alone," she warned. "If they show up, don't let them in. Record any interaction. Better yet, don't be there at all." But I knew I had to be there. I needed to see their faces when they realized their plan had failed. Call it pride or a need for closure, but I couldn't just hide and let legal letters do the talking. "I'll be careful," I promised. "But I need to confront this head-on." I spent the rest of the week preparing, gathering all my ownership documents, making copies of the forged papers, even setting up a small camera in the living room that would activate with motion. If they were coming to claim victory, I wanted to capture the moment their scheme collapsed. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect fall day that belied the confrontation to come. I sat on the dock with my coffee, watching mist rise off the lake's surface, steeling myself for what needed to be done. Around 11, I heard the distinctive sound of tires on gravel, followed by car doors slamming. They had arrived, right on schedule, likely expecting to find the house empty since I normally worked Saturdays. I moved to the front porch and waited, watching as they approached with the confident stride of people who believed they'd already won. Dad spotted me first. The flash of surprise across his face was quickly replaced with something else, a forced casualness that didn't match the tension in his shoulders. "Tommy," he called, as if this were any normal visit. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be at work." Sharon hung back slightly, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, a leather tote bag clutched in her manicured hands. She wore an outfit that seemed designed for a magazine spread about lake living, crisp white capris, a nautical striped top, and leather deck shoes that looked like they'd never seen an actual deck. "I took the day off," I said simply, not moving from my position on the porch steps. "Seemed important to be here." Dad hesitated at the bottom of the steps, clearly thrown by my presence. This wasn't how they'd planned it. They were supposed to arrive at an empty house, perhaps use their copy of the key, which would no longer work, and then call me with righteous indignation about the change locks. "Well, good," he recovered, climbing the steps with Sharon trailing behind. "We have some exciting news to share with you. Let's go inside and talk." "The locks have been changed," I said flatly. Dad stopped, his hand already reaching for the door handle. "What? Why would you do that?" "Security concerns," I replied, my voice deliberately neutral. "There's been some suspicious activity lately. Someone trying to make unauthorized changes to the property deed." Sharon's spine stiffened visibly. Dad's smile faltered, then hardened into something defensive. "Look, Tommy," he began, using the reasonable tone he'd always deployed when telling me why I couldn't do something as a kid. "We need to have a mature conversation about the future of this property. Let's not start with accusations." "Let's go in," I agreed, standing to unlock the door with my new key. "We definitely have things to discuss." They followed me inside, and I noticed Dad's eyes immediately scanning the room, cataloging any changes I might have made since their last visit. What he didn't realize was that I'd been systematically erasing their presence, returning the furniture to its original positions, removing their personal items from displayed spaces, restoring the house to what it had been before their gradual takeover. "You moved things back," Sharon said, unable to hide the displeasure in her voice. "It's my house," I replied simply. "I prefer it this way." "About that," Dad said, settling onto the couch without being invited. "We've been thinking a lot about the long-term situation here. This place is really too much for one person to maintain properly." I remained standing. "Is that so?" "Absolutely," Sharon chimed in, perching beside Dad with perfect posture. "A property like this needs consistent care. And with you so busy in the city, it just makes sense for us to take a more active role." Dad nodded enthusiastically. "We've actually got some wonderful news. Since we're practically living here half the time anyway, we've made it official." "Official?" I repeated, giving them enough rope to hang themselves. "We've updated the property records," Dad said, pulling a folder from Sharon's tote bag. "Made sure the house is protected for the whole family." He said this as if he were announcing he'd bought me a gift, his tone generous and self-satisfied. "I see," I said, feeling strangely calm now that the moment had arrived. "And when were you planning to tell me about this change?" "Well, that's why we're here." Dad spread his hands wide. "To celebrate. We've been so excited about this next chapter." Sharon stood suddenly. "I almost forgot. We have something to show you outside." They exchanged conspiratorial smiles, clearly eager to move to the next part of their prepared script. I followed them back out to the front of the house, already knowing what I would find. Near the driveway entrance, they'd installed a large wooden sign on a post driven deep into the ground. Carved an elegant script and painted a glossy navy blue were the words, "The Whitmore Retreat." Below it, in smaller letters, EST 2023. "Isn't it beautiful?" Sharon beamed. "My brother does woodworking as a hobby. He made it special for us." "For us," I repeated softly. "We thought about including Clark, too," Dad offered magnanimously, "but it just didn't flow as well. Besides, when people visit, they'll be coming to see all of us." I stared at the sign for a long moment, seeing in its polished surface the culmination of their entitlement. They'd not only tried to steal my property legally, but they were already rebranding it, erasing my ownership in every visible way. When did you put this up? I asked. Just yesterday, Sharon said proudly. We came early to get everything ready for the weekend. Ready for what exactly? Dad grinned broadly. Well, we're having a little gathering tomorrow. Just a few friends from the club, Sharon's sister and her husband, some neighbors. A housewarming, you might say. A housewarming, I echoed. For a house you don't own. His grin faltered slightly. Tommy, I know the paperwork might seem like a formality to you, but it's done. We've made it official. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document, a copy of the forged amendment. The property is now jointly owned by all three of us. It just makes sense for legacy planning. Legacy planning, I repeated, my voice hollow. Exactly, Sharon exclaimed, clearly relieved I seemed to be catching on. This way, no matter what happens, the property stays in the family. And when we're gone, it would go to you fully. It's protection, really. I almost laughed at the audacity. They were presenting their attempted theft as a favor to me. Let's go back inside, I suggested. I think we need to talk about this document. They followed me back in, exchanging satisfied glances. Dad was practically strutting, and Sharon immediately headed for the kitchen, talking over her shoulder about the lunch she'd packed for us, just some gourmet sandwiches from that little deli in Wolfboro. I sat at the dining table and gestured for Dad to join me. So, walk me through this. How exactly did this amendment get filed? Dad settled into a chair, spreading the document between us. It's pretty straightforward. We filled out the appropriate county forms, got everything notarized, Diane Felton, you remember her, and filed it last month. The three of us are now co-owners with right of survivorship. He said this last part with particular emphasis as if it were a gift. And my signature? I prompted, watching his face carefully. How did that happen? A flicker of discomfort crossed his features, quickly replaced with practiced casualness. Well, we had your power of attorney from that time you went to Europe, remember? Still valid. Made it simple. It was a lie. I'd never given him power of attorney. The Europe trip he referenced had been a 2-week backpacking adventure during college, over a decade ago, long before I owned any property. But the lie came so easily to him, so confidently, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory. I never gave you power of attorney, I said quietly. Of course you did, he insisted, with the same authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood when rewriting history to suit his narrative. Why would we forge your signature? That would be illegal. Sharon returned with a tray of elaborate sandwiches and a pitcher of iced tea, setting it in the center of the table with a flourish. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of reorganizing your pantry again. It's much more functional now. The casual presumption stunned me anew. They believed they'd won so completely that they were already reclaiming territory I'd deliberately restored. I also brought some new throws for the living room, she continued, oblivious to the tension. The ones you had didn't really match the coffee table we picked out. Dad helped himself to a sandwich, looking entirely at ease. Oh, and we scheduled the dock extension for next month. Got a great deal since it's off-season. They'll start after Thanksgiving. It's done, he added with a chuckle, biting into his sandwich. Now it belongs to us. The Clark Whitmore Lake House. Sharon smiled, raising her iced tea like it was champagne. Or just the Whitmore Retreat, as the sign says. I looked between them, my father with his satisfied smile, Sharon with her proprietary gaze roaming around my living room, already planning her next improvements. They'd plotted, lied, and forged documents to take what was mine, and now they sat in my dining room, eating sandwiches and making plans for my property as if their victory was complete. And I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine, unrestrained laugh that made them both freeze mid-bite. What's so funny? Dad asked, setting down his sandwich with a frown. I caught my breath, wiping at my eyes. You really thought this would work, didn't you? That you could just forge my signature and take my house? Sharon's smile tightened. Nobody's taking anything. We're sharing. As a family. And the forgery? I pressed, turning to her directly. Was that sharing too? Dad set his napkin down with deliberate calm. I don't appreciate your tone, Thomas. Or these accusations. Everything was done properly and legally. Was it? I asked, rising from my chair. Let me show you something. I walked to the sideboard where I'd carefully arranged my evidence, the certified copies from the county office, my original deed documents, and the cease and desist letter Rachel had prepared. Dad's eyes followed me, his expression shifting from confident to wary as I returned with the stack of papers. What's all this? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Due diligence, I replied, setting the documents on the table and pushing aside Sharon's elaborate lunch spread. Something you taught me, actually. Always read the fine print, right? Sharon glanced at Dad, uncertainty creeping into her perfect composure. She reached for her iced tea and took a sip that was a bit too long, a bit too deliberate. I visited the Carroll County Records Office earlier this week, I began, laying out the certified copies of their amendment request. Interesting paperwork you filed. Especially this part. I pointed to the signature line, where you forged my name. That's a serious accusation, Dad said stiffly, but I noticed he didn't directly deny it. It's not an accusation, it's a fact, I replied. The county clerk was very helpful. She showed me everything, including the notarization by Diane Felton, Bob's wife from your office. Convenient connection. Dad's face had gone still, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, a tell he'd had since I was a child, a sign he was calculating his next move. This is ridiculous, Sharon interjected. Alan would never do something illegal. There must be a misunderstanding. I turned to her. Is that why you've been coming up here for months? Gradually moving your things in? Testing boundaries? All part of a misunderstanding. We were helping, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. This place was sitting empty half the time. We were putting it to use, making improvements, taking it over, I corrected. Bit by bit. First visits, then staying overnight. Then leaving clothes, rearranging furniture. Then a sign with your name on it. And finally, trying to steal it outright through fraudulent paperwork. Dad leaned forward, switching tactics. Tommy, listen to me. Everything we've done has been for the family. This place is too special to be just one person's responsibility. We're not getting any younger. We're thinking about legacy here. Your legacy or mine? I asked quietly. He blinked, thrown by the question. What's the difference? We're family. The difference, I said, pulling out my original deed, is whose name is on this document. Mine. Because I saved for it. I sacrificed for it. I made it happen. Dad waved his hand dismissively. Paperwork. Legal formalities. The point, I interrupted, is that you tried to steal from me. Your own son. Sharon stood abruptly. This is getting out of hand. Alan, perhaps we should continue this conversation another time, when everyone's calmer. Sit down, Sharon, I said firmly. We're not finished. Something in my tone made her obey, sinking slowly back into her chair. I turned to the last page of my deed and slid it across the table to them. Did you actually read my deed before you tried to forge amendments to it? The whole thing? Including this clause right here. Dad reluctantly pulled the document closer, squinting slightly at the paragraph I was pointing to. Sharon leaned in, her shoulder touching his as they read together. Any amendments or transfers without the express notarized and recorded permission of the original owner, Thomas J. Clark, shall be rendered legally void and punishable by fraud. Dad's face drained of color. Sharon pulled back like she'd been burned. You planned for this? Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Not specifically for my father trying to steal my property, I replied, but for unauthorized transfers in general, yes. My friend Rachel, you remember her, the real estate attorney, suggested it as a standard protection for single owners. Sharon's hand crept to her throat. Punishable by fraud? Fraud is a felony in New Hampshire, I confirmed. Punishable by up to 7 years in prison and fines up to $4,000. Plus, anyone complicit in the forgery would face similar charges. Dad pushed the paper away like it might bite him. You can't be serious. You wouldn't press charges against your own father. Wouldn't I? I held his gaze. You forged my signature to steal my property. You were ready to let me walk into a housewarming tomorrow where you'd present yourselves as the owners to a crowd of strangers. You put up a sign with your name on my land. You lied to the county. You conspired with a notary to commit fraud. Tell me why I shouldn't press charges. The room fell into a heavy silence. Outside, a boat motor hummed across the lake, the sound drifting in through the open windows. A reminder of the peaceful world continuing beyond this moment of family implosion. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice tight. We thought you'd understand eventually. That you'd see it was better this way. A family property, secured for the future. Secured for your future, I corrected. Not mine. And certainly not secured in any way that respected me or what I've worked for. Sharon had gone very still, her earlier confidence entirely evaporated. What happens now? She asked quietly. I pulled out Rachel's cease and desist letter and placed it on top of the deed. Legally? This happens. A formal demand that you stop all attempts to claim ownership of my property. Remove that sign. Cancel any contractors you've scheduled. Take your personal belongings and leave. Dad stared at the letter, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been shame. And if we don't? Then I file a police report for forgery and fraud, I said simply. The evidence is clear. Your signature is on the amendment request. The notary can be subpoenaed. The paper trail leads directly to you. Sharon made a small, distressed sound. Dad reached for her hand automatically, his other hand curling into a fist on the table. You've done well for yourself, he said after a moment, his voice strained. More than I expected, honestly. This house, your job, you've built something impressive. I just thought, he broke off, looking around the room. I just thought I deserved to be part of it. The raw entitlement in that statement hung in the air between us. You could have been part of it, I replied quietly. As a visitor. As a welcome guest. As my father. Instead, you chose to be a thief. He flinched as if I'd struck him. That's harsh, Tommy. Is it? What would you call someone who forges documents to steal property? Dad pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I think we're done here. We are, I agreed. You have until tomorrow morning to remove your belongings and that sign. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. Sharon stood shakily, her usual poise completely gone. The lunch, leave it, I said. I'm not hungry. They gathered their things in silence. Dad's fishing vest from the hook by the door, Sharon's cardigan from the back of a chair. Small markers of their attempted colonization of my space. Dad paused at the door, turning back with a final attempt at salvaging his dignity. You know, Tommy, your grandfather would be disappointed by how this turned out. He believed in family above all. It was a low blow, invoking my grandfather, his father, who had been dead for 15 years. The same grandfather who had sat with me on the dock and encouraged my dream of owning a lake house someday. Actually, I said, meeting his gaze steadily, Grandpa believed in honesty and hard work. He left his fishing cabin to you outright when he died. He didn't need to forge anything. And what did you do with it? Sold it the next year to fund your Aspen ski trip with Sharon. Dad had no response to that. The truth of it hung between us like an indictment. Goodbye, Dad, I said, holding the door open wider. Drive carefully. They walked out in silence, shoulders stiff, feet heavy on the porch steps. I watched from the doorway as they got into their BMW, Dad fumbling slightly with his keys, Sharon staring straight ahead through the windshield. As they drove away, I noticed they left the Whitmore Retreat, sign still standing proudly at the entrance to my driveway. Of course they had. Even in defeat, they couldn't bring themselves to undo their claim. I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had drained me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just anger or vindication I felt, but a profound sadness. Something fundamental had broken today, something that couldn't be fixed with apologies or time. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Rachel. Any update? Do we need to escalate? I typed back, confronted them with the evidence. They've left. We'll keep you posted on compliance. Then I walked to the kitchen and mechanically began cleaning up the elaborate lunch Sharon had laid out. Artisan bread, imported cheeses, sliced prosciutto, all abandoned in their hasty retreat. Food that was meant to celebrate their victory, now just debris from a failed coup. As I worked, I noticed a small leather-bound notebook on the counter, Sharon's, no doubt. I flipped it open and found detailed notes about the lake house. Future renovation plans. Contact information for local contractors. A list of furniture to replace. T's taste is so bachelor. And most disturbingly, a schedule for the housewarming party they'd planned for tomorrow, with a handwritten note in the margin. Invitations sent from our new lake house email, whitmoretreat@gmail.com. They had created an email address for my house. They had sent invitations. They had fully committed to their fantasy of ownership. I closed the notebook and set it aside, making a mental note to change all my utility accounts and property tax contact information. If they'd gone this far, who knew what other connections they might have established in my name? Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was moving in across the lake, darkening the afternoon sky. I walked to the windows and watched the wind begin to stir the water into choppy waves, sending the few remaining kayakers hurrying to shore. It suited my mood, this gathering darkness, this sudden change in the atmosphere. Something had ended today, something beyond the immediate threat to my property. As rain began to patter against the roof, I realized what it was, the illusion that my father had ever truly seen me as separate from himself, as a person with my own rights and boundaries. In his mind, anything I achieved was ultimately an extension of him, a resource he could draw from, a success he could claim. The storm picked up, rain now hammering against the windows, lightning flashing over the lake. I turned away from the view and caught sight of myself in the hall mirror, pale, determined, somehow older than I'd appeared this morning. "It's done," I whispered to my reflection, echoing Dad's words from earlier, but with an entirely different meaning. Not a celebration of theft completed, but an acknowledgement of ties severed, of hard truths finally faced. I picked up my phone and texted Rachel again, "I'm going to need your help with a restraining order. Just in case." The next morning, I woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through my bedroom window, the storm having cleared overnight. For a moment I lay still, savoring the quiet and the sense of reclaimed space. Then I remembered the sign. I still needed to remove their declaration of ownership from my property. I dressed quickly and headed outside with a shovel. The ground was soft from the rain, making it easier to dig around the post. Whoever had installed it, probably not my dad with his bad back and aversion to manual labor, had done a thorough job. The concrete footing went down at least 2 feet. As I worked, loosening the soil, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I straightened, half expecting to see the BMW returning, Dad having thought of some new argument overnight. Instead, a battered green pickup pulled into the driveway, and my sister Jen hopped out. "Need a hand?" she called, walking over in muddy boots and worn jeans. Unlike me, Jen had inherited Dad's dark hair and olive complexion, but her practical nature and forthright manner were entirely her own. "What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised but glad to see her. "Got a weird text from Dad last night. Something about you threatening him with jail." She surveyed the sign I was trying to remove. "The Whitmore Retreat? You have got to be kidding me." I leaned on my shovel. "It's a long story. I've got time," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "And another shovel in the truck. Let's get this monstrosity down first." We worked together, digging around the concrete base until we could rock it loose. With a final heave, we toppled the sign face down into the mud. "Good riddance," Jen said, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "Now, coffee and details. Not necessarily in that order." Inside, I made a pot of strong coffee while summarizing the events of the past months, the gradual invasion, the forged documents, yesterday's confrontation. Jen listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly incredulous. "Unbelievable," she said finally, shaking her head. "I mean, I knew Dad could be self-centered, but this is next level." "And that's Sharon," she made a disgusted sound. "She's been trying to get her hooks into anything valuable since day one." "You never liked her," I observed, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter. "Because I saw through her," Jen replied. The way she maneuvered to get Dad to sell Mom out of their retirement savings, how she isolated him from his friends. This is just her latest play. I hadn't considered that angle, that Sharon might be the driving force behind the attempted property grab. It made a certain sense, though Dad was certainly no innocent bystander. Has he tried to contact you since yesterday? Jen asked. No, I said. But he left that sign up, which says plenty. Classic Dad, she snorted. Passive-aggressive to the end. He's probably waiting for you to call him and apologize. The thought was so absurd that I laughed. For what? Not letting him steal my house. For embarrassing him. For catching him. For making him face consequences. Jen sipped her coffee. He sent me this text at like 2 a.m. Your brother has forgotten what family means. Maybe you could talk some sense into him. As if I'd be on his side after hearing what he did. What did you reply? Nothing yet. Wanted to get your version first. She pulled out her phone. But now I'm thinking something like, family means not committing felonies against your children. Maybe you need the sense talking. Might be a little harsh, I said, but couldn't help smiling. Forgery is harsh, Tommy, she replied, typing quickly. Betrayal is harsh. He's lucky you're not pressing charges. I watched her send the text, feeling a rush of gratitude for her unwavering support. We'd always been close, but as adults, our busy lives had created distance. Yet here she was, without hesitation, standing with me. Thanks for coming, I said quietly. She looked up from her phone, her expression softening. That's what actual family does, dummy. Shows up when it matters. We spent the morning cleaning up the last traces of Dad and Sharon's presence. Jen helped me carry their abandoned clothes and personal items to the shed, in case they come back for them, though I wouldn't hold my breath. She said pragmatically. Around noon, my phone rang, an unknown local number. I answered cautiously. Mr. Clark? This is Diane Felton. The notary. Her voice was tense. I'm calling about the property amendment for Silver Lake. There's been a misunderstanding. I put the call on speaker so Jen could hear. What kind of misunderstanding, Miss Felton? Well, your father assured me you had authorized the amendment. He said you were traveling and couldn't appear in person. I've known Alan for years through the insurance office, so I didn't question it. She paused. I've just received a very concerning letter from a lawyer about fraud charges. That would be my lawyer, I confirmed. Since you notarized a document with my forged signature. I never saw you sign it, she admitted in a small voice. Alan brought it in already signed. Said you were out of state. And you notarized it anyway? Isn't the whole point of notarization to verify the signature? She made a distressed sound. I know. It was wrong. I've been friends with your father for 15 years. I trusted him. I've already reported myself to the notary commission. I'll probably lose my license. Jen raised her eyebrows at me, silently asking what I wanted to do. Miss Felton, I said after a moment, I appreciate your honesty. If you're willing to provide a signed statement about what happened, I might be willing to not include you in any further legal action. Yes, absolutely, she said quickly. Anything you need. I'm so sorry, Mr. Clark. I never thought, she broke off. Alan has always been so respected in the community. After I hung up, Jen whistled low. Dad's house of cards is collapsing. If she makes a statement, he's totally exposed. I don't actually want to send him to jail, I admitted. I just want him to understand what he did was wrong. Really wrong. And Sharon? I shrugged. Honestly? I wouldn't mind if she faced some consequences. Jen laughed. That's my brother. Selective mercy. Later that afternoon, as we sat on the dock with sandwiches, watching a pair of loons dive for fish, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Sign was removed. We'll collect our belongings next weekend if convenient. Please advise preferred time. The formality of it, the complete absence of an apology or even acknowledgement of wrongdoing, was so typical that I almost laughed. Want me to be here when they come? Jen offered. I considered it, picturing another confrontation, more accusations, more drama. No, I decided. I'll have the shed unlocked and leave their things there. They can come when I'm not around. You sure? Dad might try to talk his way back in. The locks are changed, I reminded her. And honestly, I don't want to see him right now. Maybe not for a long time. She nodded, understanding. It's going to be awkward at Christmas. I'm thinking Bali for Christmas this year, I said, only half joking. Always wanted to see it. Mom would kill you, Jen pointed out. But I'd come with you. We could start a new tradition. The idea appealed more than I expected. A holiday free from old patterns and expectations. A fresh start. Maybe we should, I said. Life's too short to spend it with people who don't respect your boundaries. Jen reached over and squeezed my shoulder. Look at you, all grown up and setting healthy limits. I texted Dad back, your belongings are in the shed. The combination is 3824. Please remove everything by next Sunday. No pleasantries, no invitation for discussion. His reply came almost immediately. We deserve a chance to talk this through as a family. I showed the message to Jen, who rolled her eyes. Still trying to control the narrative. Not this time, I said, and typed, all communication through my attorney going forward. Her contact information is attached. I added Rachel's business card details and hit send. It felt both terrible and liberating, drawing this firm boundary with my own father. But I understood now that without it, nothing would change. He would continue to push, to take, to justify. You're doing the right thing, Jen said quietly, seeming to read my thoughts. It sucks, but it's right. The following weeks brought a series of legal maneuvers. Dad hired his own attorney, who sent formal letters disputing my version of events. Rachel responded with the notary-signed statement and copies of the forged documents. Eventually, Dad's lawyer proposed a settlement. They would sign a legal acknowledgement that they had no claim to the property and agree to stay away, in exchange for me not pursuing criminal charges. Rachel called to discuss it. It's a reasonable offer, Tommy. They know they're cornered. This gives you the protection you need without a drawn-out legal battle. What about Sharon's involvement? I asked. She was clearly part of the scheme. The agreement would cover both of them, Rachel confirmed. Neither could make any claim on the property in the future. I agreed to the terms with one addition. They would pay all legal fees incurred, including the cost of correcting the county records. Dad's lawyer tried to negotiate this point, but eventually conceded when Rachel mentioned the potential cost of criminal defense attorneys. Sharon left my father 3 months later. I heard about it from Jen, who had maintained minimal contact with Dad. Apparently once she realized there was no lake house in her future, the bloom was off the rose, Jen reported. She's already dating some retired surgeon from Portsmouth. I wasn't surprised. Sharon had always been calculated in her relationships, looking for what she could gain. Dad had been a comfortable catch until he wasn't. As for Dad and me, the rift remained. He made several attempts to clear the air, as he put it, leaving voicemails that never quite included an apology, sending holiday cards signed, "Love, Dad," as if nothing had happened. I returned the cards unopened. The voicemails went unanswered. Mom tried to mediate at one point. He's still your father, Tommy. People make mistakes. Forgery isn't a mistake, Mom. It's a crime. A deliberate choice. She sighed, her loyalty torn. He's lonely now. Sharon took half of everything in the divorce. Maybe that will help him understand how it feels when someone tries to take what's yours, I replied, unable to summon much sympathy. A year passed. I spent more time at the lake house, gradually making it truly mine again. I repainted rooms, added a small writing desk where I could work remotely, planted a garden that would bloom in spring. The property records were updated with additional safeguards that Rachel recommended. One crisp October evening, almost exactly a year after the confrontation, I sat on my dock watching the sunset. Paint the water gold and crimson. The air held that distinct autumn smell, leaves, and wood smoke, and the earthy scent of the lake itself. In my hand was a letter that had arrived that morning from my father, the handwriting on the envelope instantly recognizable. I'd almost thrown it away unopened, like the others. But something had made me break the seal. Maybe time, maybe curiosity, maybe some small hope for resolution. Dear Tommy, it began. I've written this letter a dozen times in my head over the past year. Nothing I can say will undo what I did, but I need to try anyway. I betrayed your trust. I tried to take something that was rightfully yours, something you worked for, something you earned. There's no justification for it. I could tell you about feeling entitled to a comfortable retirement, about Sharon's influence, about my own jealousy of what you've created for yourself. But those would be excuses, not reasons. The simple truth is that I was wrong. Completely wrong. I've lost so much because of it, Sharon, your respect, my self-respect. If you never forgive me, I would understand. But I needed you to know that I finally understand what I did, and I am truly sorry. Love, Dad. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. The sun had nearly disappeared now, just a sliver of light along the horizon. A loon called somewhere in the distance, its haunting cry echoing across the water. Forgiveness might come someday. Not today, maybe not for years. Trust, as I'd known from the beginning, would never fully return. But acknowledgement, real acknowledgement of the harm done, that was something. A start, perhaps. The lake house remained what it had always been meant to be, my sanctuary, earned through my own efforts, protected by my own vigilance. Not a place of leverage or possession, but a home. My home. As darkness settled over the water and the first stars appeared in the clear sky, I thought about what family really means. Not blind loyalty or shared ownership or unearned claims. Not even shared DNA. True family, I had learned, was about respect. About recognizing boundaries. About celebrating each other's achievements without trying to claim them as your own. Jen was coming up this weekend. We'd go hiking, maybe try to catch the last of the fall colors before winter set in. That was family showing up, supporting each other, respecting each other's space and dreams. The light had faded completely now, leaving just the reflection of stars on the dark water. I stood and gathered my jacket, Dad's letter still in my hand. I wouldn't answer it yet, but I wouldn't throw it away either. Some conversations needed time, space, reflection, just like some wounds needed air to heal properly. Inside my house, undisputedly, securely mine, the lights glowed warm and welcoming. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the night, embracing the peace I'd fought so hard to preserve.